Welcome to SaaS Unlocked, the place where we get to hear from amazing entrepreneurs and innovators who are revolutionizing the world of business. I'm your host, Chris Cowden, the country manager at Insidea, and I'm excited to introduce you to a friend and mentor of mine who is revolutionizing the podcasting industry. We're going to hear all about her mission, her solutions, and unfiltered business insights about the startup world. So today's guest is Melinda Wittstock. Welcome to SaaS Unlocked.
It's so great to be with you, Chris. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. So can you tell, for those who don't know you, you're the CEO of Podopolo, but where did you start on your journey before you even decided to build something like Podopolo?
Okay, so it's kind of a long story. I really started out, as a kid, I was always very entrepreneurial. I was the kind of kid that would go door to door demanding prepayment for my show and just assuming that people would want to come and whatnot. And they did. So I've always been entrepreneurial, but I really got my career really kicked off as a journalist, covering the media for the Times of London. At a very young age, I was only 22 when I was doing that job, and there was this new thing called the internet, and I got to interview all these amazing, people innovating, in media and increasingly in media and technology. And I was the type of journalist, I think, back then where I wanted to know, because I'm quite visionary, I kind of wanted to know where the story, I guess, in that sense, was going next. And I just learned a tremendous amount, like from interviewing people like Steve Jobs or, Ted Turner, the founder of CNN, or Richard Branson, or all these people. And I started getting interviewed on television about my stories that I would break on the Times, like for the BBC and elsewhere. And I ended up becoming a television news anchor. And that led me to start to also create television programs. I created Financial Times television for the newspaper, created shows for the BBC, documentaries for Channel 4 in Britain and such. And so I became as much a producer as the quote unquote talent, but I loved live television and interviewing people and such. There was a certain point, though, where my entrepreneurial bug bit. And all 5 of my businesses, including Podopolo, have all been at the intersection of media and technology. The first one was very much about being able to personalize or localize political content at scale here in the United States, serving more than 300 public radio stations and many more television stations and newspapers with localized coverage of the U.S. government, of Congress and the White House and such, in terms of how decisions were impacting locally. And it was a really interesting business model innovation to allow that kind of localization at scale. It had never been done before. And the technology bug really bit for me around that same time, where I got very enamored with crowdsourcing the news, and created one of the first ever crowdsourcing apps. It was pre-Instagram. It was around the same time that Twitter and Facebook were launching. And we had everything from video sharing and photo sharing, but crowdsourced news, and also the beginnings of AI, unsupervised machine learning and natural language processing, to ascertain the relevance and reliability of the content. And this is going way back, like a long time ago, like Newsit was like 2010, 2011. So the level of innovation there was way beyond. I mean, it would be hard to even do that now, right? And so suffice to say, I won't go through all the companies, but they were all at the intersection of how to improve media, whether it was for personalization or whether it was making the content more relevant or using technology in innovative ways. So that's really been my life's mission in a way. Started all those years back ago as media correspondent of the Times of London. And so in about 2017, I became a podcaster. And I immediately experienced all the issues that podcasters have trying to be discovered, trying to market their content and such, and grow their audiences, right the way through to monetizing content. 98% of podcasters don't even qualify for advertising because their audiences are too small because it's a niche media. And so there was this big disconnect there. At one point with my own podcast, Chris, I had 6 different businesses that I created that were ancillary to my podcast just to support my podcast.
Yeah, that's not fair at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
insane.
backwards.
And most podcasters aren't podcasting. They're not necessarily business people, or they're not, marketers. I mean, they have a voice, a powerful voice, something really important to say in the world. And really, in an ideal world, I thought everybody really should be able to be free to focus on that content, but also to be able to make money, from their own content. So I took all the expertise I had through all the different, media and different technologies and whatnot, and they really converged in a big way with Podopolo, because I looked around and I didn't see anyone else solving it. And I thought, oh, wow, this isn't just me. Our other podcasters going through the same thing. And meanwhile, what's happening, to the listener? So it began kind of a period of pretty deep research around the time of the pandemic, when the pandemic first hit. And I discovered that really everybody was having the same issue, unless they were already super famous or, super connected, knew someone at Apple that could put them up on New and Noteworthy or whatever. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it just seemed unfair to me. And I also thought the listener was being shortchanged because it was very difficult to discover new podcasts. And it was very difficult to be able to have an instantaneous discussion with a friend about what you were learning on a podcast, for instance, or being able to share podcasts. All that kind of stuff was just completely missing. There hadn't really been any innovation. And I looked around, I didn't really see anyone else doing it. So hence Podopolo. And so my own podcast really, and I think a lot of great businesses start this way. It's like you've experienced the pain yourself, and then you have the solutions really by way of your own background to really be able to come to it. So that's really the genesis story.
Yeah, well, that's a lot to take in, from media at 22 all the way to so many. But it's amazing to know that you've used all the companies and you've gained that research from. I wonder if you've got like a massive notebook of all your notes of, okay, this will work for this company, and I'm going to build this company because I had this major issue when I was 22 and it hasn't been fixed yet. So my next business will be blah 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 blah. I wonder if
I wish I could say there was a note. That there isn't really. It's just sort of in my head. It just is. It sort of feels like part of me.
So how did you check? Because I know you always said you had an entrepreneurial spirit. When was there a point in your career when you were interviewing all these people and then you became an anchor that you said, I need to start my own business?
Yeah,
or were you doing it alongside the full-time
role? I was
role?
kind of doing it alongside. I always had all these ideas. I kept having ideas for businesses, but I was busy and I was happy being a news anchor. I enjoyed that. I anchored for BBC World Television. I had anchored the Financial Times television show that I had, co-executive produced and co-created, and done the deal with CNBC. I had anchored for ABC News with Anderson Cooper in New York, worked for MSNBC, all the things. And I was paid well, I was comfortable, very happy in that position, but something was missing. And I think around the time of when I was anchoring, around the time of Monica Lewinsky, and I was just getting kind of bored because I was just in the Clinton scandal and, all of that. And I just felt like I was doing the same story every day. It started to get a little bit boring to me. And I started to think, wow, political coverage is really bad. But, I wonder why, people, aren't voting. They don't really know much about the democracy that they live in, and I had that kind of, going in the back of my mind. And then, the internet was really kind of taking off, and I started to see all the possibilities of that for news and for content. And then the final straw, actually, really, it was 9/11, because after 9/11, and I'd lived in New York, and in fact, I'd moved out of my apartment, which was right in downtown Manhattan, 2 days before 9/11. And so I'd just missed that. In fact, the landing gear of one of the planes had come down on the awning of my old building.
Oh.
And everybody was talking about, wow, our democracy is so important to defend. And I'm like, well, yes, but so why aren't people voting? And so that's really, I wanted to really improve journalism around that. I felt sort of a civic calling, I think. And I realized that it was going to be impossible to do that from within any major media, and so that's when I had the idea for Capital News Connection, which was really that first significant business.
Yeah. And then you leveraged all the connections that you'd made there to make that a huge success. And I'm guessing that's what you did.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, in a lot of ways, though, we felt like complete outsiders because we were kind of challenging the status quo. So there's there are people that are your contacts and friends and whatnot in a context of here's how it's done. And then when you challenge that, it's not that they didn't like you anymore, but it's just like, you're competitive, like you're going to disrupt their business model.
Yeah, we were listening to the who was it? The news anchors that were on Sky News or something. They created the News Agents podcast. They were doing something that was at the podcast show. They were doing something a little bit different. They're moving away from the the
news media at the time. Yeah, the news media at the time was very resistant to the internet. I mean, because it's threatening, right? Just like we see like all these big disruptions in technology, just like if you think of AI right now and how that is going to change so much in some ways that are really exciting and beneficial, and other ways that are like flat out terrifying because it could go so many different ways. And so with the internet, there was a lot of resistance. And then I was like, okay, well, I guess we have to play along. But then the whole business model, and I think I saw that coming, that the whole business model of traditional media was going to collapse. Mm-hmm. And so like now we see that with the writer's strike and the actor's strike, because the whole movie business model is broken. And as a result, folks aren't getting paid. It's a streaming model now, and you start to see all these disruptions, and so technology is very interesting in that case. If you can leverage it for good, or not. But if you put your head in the sand, you'll be run over. And so that disruption that really began with the internet was really the fuel that powers a lot of kind of innovative thinking in terms of that. And so with Podopolo, and just philosophically, where you have an economic condition where so many people, talented content people, are being kind of left behind. I mean, whether you look at, say, Spotify and how it treats musicians, I mean, they barely get pennies. So like even a song that has 1 million downloads, I mean, they're lucky to get pennies on that. And this is why we see the actors and the writers striking right now. And so with podcasting, it started out that podcasters were basically penniless. And I just really philosophically want to change that balance.
Yeah. I think I love that you're thinking about, I already know you, but you're doing incredible for me as a podcaster and for the community. And I love what you're doing with the Podopolo app and the vision you have behind it. And it's tech for good. I was always looking for technologies to associate myself where they had a great CEO who was hands-on and had a really great vision. So I'm glad that you've created something and you're giving back as a philanthropy company as well.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really, really big part of this. I think just when you're looking at AI, just the ethics of it, is really, a challenging thing. And we've had all these things, like when we think of, the way Podopolo uses AI is specifically to connect people to the right podcasts that are of interest for them, but also to really change the game of advertising so that a podcaster with a small audience can still make money from advertising, just because it's contextually relevant to the audience that's listening. You don't necessarily need a big audience if the right ad is being heard by the right audience, et cetera, right? So there are lots of ways in which AI can really facilitate that, for good. There are also all kinds of challenges I see coming. Like, I think it's wonderful that there's generative AI and people can create all this incredible content. And yet there's all sorts of challenges coming about who owns that content. Right. And so we see a lot of interesting things around the horizon that we're working on right now beyond like what we have and all the cool features that are coming to Podopolo, but the ownership of podcasts, because right now, honestly, Chris, I could take your podcast or your voice. I could put it to a script. I could invent a podcast around your voice, say it was your voice, put you in speaking in Mandarin, and I create a whole deep fake video around you. And I could like own that, not least of which all the people that created the generative model that allowed that to happen, right? These are really, really big challenges, and companies like Podopolo really want to be in the ethical lead in terms of how that's done and how content providers can actually protect the ownership of their content is becoming an issue.
Yeah.
On top of all the other things like monetizing it. But if you can't control the ownership of it, it's pretty difficult to monetize. So this is becoming increasingly, a significant issue that we're working on technical solutions for, leveraging blockchain in particular to actually understand who owns what, because I think blockchain is going to be a really important part of authenticating the AI, and that those two together are going to be a very significant the blockchain is going to be a very significant solution to actually understanding who owns what and the veracity of content as well.
Right. I didn't even realize that was part of Podopolo's responsibility, is beyond the features, the laws behind or trying, you were saying,
we don't have to do that
and stuff, but you want to be like at the forefront of this, the leaders.
Exactly.
In helping podcasters own their voice and own all their content.
We just see that coming. Like, I think, Podopolo is very much operates from its core values. We put a lot of effort into thinking, okay, so what are our core values and how do we operationalize those values? So one of those values is innovation. And if innovation is a core value, you're always innovating. So you've always got to be looking at what's going on around you. What are the emerging problems? Because we have a society and technology, like the AI revolution is so much more than the industrial revolution. Think of how much change happened with the industrial revolution, right? So the change is coming so quickly. So if innovation is at your core, you've always got to be looking ahead, like what's coming next, on one level. One of our other values is abundance. And abundance is the opposite of scarcity. A lot of people in business operate in scarcity, and the way it manifests, say in the media context, is creating a walled garden. Like, I've got to own everything myself, or like that. Or it can, in a workplace, it can manifest as office politics, or people being jealous of each other, or like trying to prevent someone else from succeeding. Podopolo, why abundance is one of our highest values and how we operationalize that is because we really believe in open ecosystems, because that's what's ultimately best for the consumer. That's what's best for citizens. And so, just philosophically, it's things like interoperability. It's things like really being able to assist people, not feeling like we have to be the only game in town, but looking for solutions and partners where all boats can rise. And in our own team, being very collaborative. So there's just like two of our highest values. The other ones are diversity and collaboration and integrity and such. So as long as we're living by those in everything we do, we'll be good. But typically as an entrepreneur, entrepreneurs love challenges. It's kind of like a red flag to a bull. You know what I mean? You see something that needs to be fixed and you just like, and that's
if you can solve problems, you'll be an entrepreneur. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because that's a really big part of it, especially when you're playing like, at that kind of high stakes entrepreneurial thing where you're really innovating something, like you're changing the game, you're changing a business model, you're changing a system, you're changing an ecosystem. That's hard.
I don't want to have those big problems.
There's
Or
a lot of
maybe I do. I'm right
Yeah.
at the start, so
It's
it's
really hard
exciting to
because
be around people. Yeah, I'm slowly getting into that abundance mindset, but I'd be amazed to see what can happen in the next 20 years with my mindset. But yeah, if I surround myself with people like you, I'm bound to
it's
be
a
able to
journey.
get there. It's a journey, yeah.
It's a journey, and it really, just on a very personal level, it starts with gratitude. I mean, just really being grateful for who you are, and what you have, all the things that you have, and some of the things that we don't even notice that we have. That leads to just a sense of compassion and just really appreciating the talents of others and such. So I think with a lot of great businesses and just leadership, we see all kinds of examples of leadership. We see the Elon Musk kind, which is about various measuring contests and such, which seems like really the kind of juvenile. I'm just going to say juvenile. Okay. Performative, juvenile, scarcity, fear-based, not a great way, I think, ultimately for our civilization. And then you see other modes that are just much more ethical and uplifting for people and such. And that's where I want to play. Now, it's easier sometimes to take that other route. It's very tempting. This one's a bit harder, but it's ultimately better, and succeeding with it, I think, is sweeter. So
yeah, and it's much more fulfilling, even at the smaller level. It's much more fulfilling to see people happy and want to be around you and feeling empowered, and but to be able to do it on a big scale, I know you've got it in you. So what have you noticed has been one of the biggest mistakes entrepreneurs or startups face right at the start of their journey that they could maybe
well,
avoid? They've got to learn their lessons, but
well, there's so many things that can go wrong, right? I will start with the sort of internal mind game, because that's actually the biggest thing that holds us back. Like limited, having a limited vision, or being inflexible, or thinking that really obsessing with how it's going to happen. Really, where you need to keep your mind is your North Star, where you're going. I like to use a sailing metaphor. If you're sailing to a destination, it is impossible physically to go in a straight line. The reason being is that the winds are changing, the current is changing, the weather is changing. You're going to have all kinds of different circumstances you can't predict. So to sail to a destination, you have to zigzag. There's no other way. So coming into entrepreneurship, it's really important, just in your mind and your heart and everything in your being, to actually understand that you are going to be constantly pivoting. Like that there's so much stuff beyond your control. And when things happen, it doesn't really say anything about you as a person. It's just that, oh, this is a new input. This is something that I either can or cannot control. And what you can control is what you do with that new information, or the changing circumstances. And changing circumstances are the people around you. I'm sorry, my phone went off there. Apologies. The changing circumstances of the people around you, or just economic circumstances, new technologies, all these things. So you've got to really keep your mind there. But I think getting into the actual brass tacks of the biggest mistakes I see entrepreneurs make is a sort of a rigidity of I 100% it's got to be my way or the highway, that kind of inflexibility. The other one I see that a lot of folks make is not getting close to their customers early enough, like spending a lot of time building a product, time and expense on a product, and essentially launching too late without co-creating with the customers. I mentor a lot of entrepreneurs, and too many times they'll say my product does this, it does that, it does this, it does that, it just, all these things. And it's like, hey, that's great. So who's it for? What are their 3:00 in the morning moments? What problem are you solving? Who are your customers? And if I get an answer like my product is for everybody, my alarm bells go off, because it might be eventually, if it's Google,
Yeah.
it'll eventually become for everybody, but very rarely does it start out that way. So being really fanatical about solving problems for your customers and really understanding who they are, like talking to them incessantly, learning from them, and creating solutions that can then prove that a small group of people really love what you do. You can build on that foundation. And of course, you can add, whether it's expanding geographically or vertically or whatever. You have an early proof point that doesn't cost you a lot of time or a lot of money to get to that proof point. It's something kind of to build on. So that's a very significant one. And then the other one is really about sales, where entrepreneurs are afraid to sell their own stuff. Like, you have to get over that. And I think we all have money mindset issues. And so I see a lot of entrepreneurs underpricing their services, over delivering, kind of burning out. And I think in the end, that comes down to how much do you really value what you're doing, or value even yourself? And by extension, how much value are you actually creating for a customer? So Chris, say with any podcast on Podopolo, what's the before and after? So say you start on Podopolo, if I were able to bring you an audience of 100,000 people, what value would that be to you? I mean, what would it actually mean? What would it mean for your life? What would it mean for your income? What would it mean for other opportunities? What would it mean, right? And so I encourage entrepreneurs to think in that way, assuming your success, that your product or your service works in the way that you intend, and you're creating value for people. What does it actually mean to them? What's the before and after? Because once you go through that mental exercise, you start to really understand the value of what you're doing. And then that starts to really help you with things like your pricing and your strategy and all these other sorts of things.
Yeah, that's funny you say that, because I started reading the How to Win Friends and Influence Them, and one of the principles is what's in it for them, or do what other people, because nobody really cares about you. You have to care about other people more than yourself, sort of thing. So finding the value in what it means for them, for a product or an experience, is the most important. And those little tips, I'm gonna go back, because I need to listen to that over and over again, so that I don't make
it's interesting.
I feel like I need to value my time a little bit more. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you see even very seasoned entrepreneurs making those mistakes, right? If you look back, I'm a little bit obsessed on the collapse of Twitter, for instance. I was one of the first 100 users of Twitter. I thought Twitter was just so cool. It had so much potential. And to watch what's happened to it over the last 8 months. Now you have someone who can launch rockets and like create electric cars, has done amazing things, a terrific entrepreneur, but that doesn't necessarily make that person really good at social media. So had Elon Musk actually listened to his customers on Twitter, he would have made very different decisions, right? So it can happen to even people who are really experienced, who can forget that kind of really core thing.
Yeah, it's a bit like completely different industry, the hospitality industry. A lot of professionals will say that they want a restaurant with no hospitality experience, and it's always I can remember when I was working in kitchens, they would, the new owners of the restaurant were lawyers, and they just didn't have a clue how to run a business. It's very similar. It's like, yes, you've got experience building cars and manufacturing factories, but you're not a content creator or content marketer. You don't understand.
Just like Mark Zuckerberg wouldn't be able to launch a rocket either, right?
Yeah.
I think it's called the Dunning-Kruger syndrome. It's where someone's really, really smart at something, and so they assume that they're smart at everything else. It's dangerous.
That's a big mistake. That is the biggest mistake then. So make sure that you stay in your lane.
100%.
But also, you said right at the beginning that you were running a podcast alongside the 5 businesses to keep the podcast going. Would
Yeah.
you say then diversification is not important or important?
Well, it depends on the business model, of course. I mean, in this case, I got going with my podcast and I was like, where is everybody? Because I thought, sort of launched it and launched it actually in an intelligent way. I used principles of gamification and such. Like I launched with like way over deliver, like 20 episodes, but all with interviewees that had massive, email lists of 1 million people and big social followings. I got them to promote on the same day. So Wings of Inspired Business, which is about female entrepreneurship, launched big, but it was still like really hard to get to the kind of numbers like that would allow me to get advertising for the podcast, which was my original idea. Like, I'm just going to kind of make this sustaining. I'd sold my previous business. I didn't know what my next business was. So the podcast was kind of my thing at that point while I was figuring out, okay, what's the next business I'm going to do? Right. So I had this, it was kind of like this interesting scenario. And I was just really surprised by how hard it was, even with all my business experience and expertise, my marketing experience and expertise, content, like technology, like I, coming into it with everything I knew and such, it was still hard. So with the content, I just got very smart at repurposing it. So the first revenue stream was repurposing a lot of those interviews into an online summit, right? Which people could listen to for free over the course of the week, but they could pay $97 to get the recordings, right? And that actually really took off. It had like this really great, like 50% conversion rate. It was amazing. I made some money from that. That was great. Kept me going for a while. And then it's kind of like, okay, I got to find another trick. So turn that into a membership course, learned all about creating courses and membership programs on the internet. That was new. I'd never done that before. That actually worked. That morphed into also doing retreats, high-end retreats. So I did that like leading up to the pandemic when I couldn't do them anymore in the pandemic. So that kind of tailed off. And then what else did I do? Oh yeah, it's teaching people how to create podcasts. I mean, right? Like, and then business mentoring, like mastermind, like individual mastermind, high ticket, so those were all the things I had just completely related to the podcast.
But not actually the actual podcast itself.
The actual podcast itself never.
I feel like when people say monetize the podcast, it means monetizing with courses, with memberships, with other services.
Often,
but the actual podcast itself, is probably where the biggest challenge is.
Exactly. That's why also often you've got to really, like when we work. So Podopolo has an arm of it called Brand Studio. So we work with some pretty major brands now to create their podcasts and other, entrepreneurs and such. And what's always interesting, and even when I was, doing a lot of consulting work to help people launch their podcasts, they would always come to me and ask questions like, the thing they were obsessing about was their tech, like their microphone. What kind of microphone should I have? All these sorts of things. And it's kind of like, oh my God, that's the least of your worries. Because really what you've got to do is understand, okay, why are you podcasting? What is success? Like, why? Okay. So if you get out there with a podcast, what do you want as a result of that? Do you want your are you creating a media business where you want your podcast to be a self-sustaining business? That's a very different strategy than I'm creating a podcast as lead gen into my existing business, right? So I'm going to be my own sponsor. Or, you know what? I don't care. I just want to have enough money to sustain it because I have a really important mission in the world that, right? So the motivation for podcasting can be very different for different people, but actually really understanding that, really understanding who your audience is, just like in entrepreneurship, understanding your customers. Like podcasting is very similar. You have to know, who are you talking to? Where are they? Why would your content be relevant to them in a sea of so many podcasts? Why you? How are you going to engage them and turn them into loyal ambassadors that will tell their friends about your podcast and such? This is really important. And really having a good marketing strategy around it, like how you're going to get the word out about it and such. All these things are very labor intensive. And it's one of the reasons, again, why we created Podopolo, to take, on the marketing side, to just make that easier. For people. So that's why, we have things like clip sharing, where anyone can create a short clip of a podcast and instantaneously with one click be able to share it like 30 seconds out or a minute out, either on the app itself or out to, Reels or TikTok or LinkedIn or wherever, their audience is, and really spark that discussion. Because if I share, Chris, a whole podcast with you, you're a busy guy, you may or may not get around to listening to it, even if you really want to, because other things, events overtake you and you just get really, really busy. But I was listening to a podcast and there was a quote from a guest that I knew was absolutely 100% relevant to you, and I could just send you that soundbite instantaneously, and it was really helpful to you in your life or your business or, whatever you're doing, or it just would make you laugh and improve your day, you're going to listen to that, and then you're going to discover that podcast, and you're going to say, oh, that's really cool. I'm going to follow that podcast. I want to hear more. And because the time investment of listening to 30 seconds or a minute is not much of an investment, but it can get you hooked on that podcast and get other people hooked on it. And so that's just one example of a sort of a viral growth tool that's actually just part of the Podopolo app, and part of that to really help, podcasters get discovered. The other one being the recommendation engine, that just, what we know about who's on the app and how they're listening and their interests and such and their friendships, we can really surface and recommend the right podcast for them based on what we already know about them. And so it makes discovery of podcasts easier. The opposite of that matchmaking is, for the podcaster, really connecting the podcaster to their ideal audience, taking a lot of the guesswork and a lot of the labor intensity out of finding your audience. And then there's so many more monetization tools in behind that. But that first thing is grow the reach, and then find easy ways to engage your audience that aren't labor intensive. And then all of that also, really leads to a lot of the monetization.
Yeah, it's really exciting platform. I wonder if you could, and I know you're going to be making some announcements, but this podcast will go live later on. I wonder if you can give me a bit of an exclusive on what new features are coming.
Oh my God, there's so many. So the clip sharing, up until now, it's really been only within the app, but now with one click, it's like out to any platform. There's going to be increasingly over the coming months, major updates to the recommendation engine. And this is significant because the AI will be going into each, like we have 6 million podcasts on the platform in all languages, right? So hundreds of millions of episodes. It's kind of a big data set, right? The AI will be able to tag topically each episode. Now, this is important because, say, the categorization of podcasts right now, you get 3 Apple categories, and the whole industry is operated around that. It's a really blunt instrument. And but for listeners, any podcast episode, if say your podcast is about business, entrepreneurship, marketing, or whatever, right? But you'll come in other topics and other guests. So to instantly know what is the categorization of all that instantaneously allows for the automation of clips to be created. It improves the recommendation engine, like by an order of magnitude. Like already what we have is way more than anybody else in the space, but it just takes it up to a whole new level. But it really powers significant improvements in contextual advertising, and allows advertisers brand safety about where their ad would be placed relative to content. So that's a major thing. It's kind of like back end. So it's not like a feature that you're necessarily going to notice as a feature, but it is going to wildly improve everything for podcasters, for listeners, and advertisers. So that's a big one. The other thing you'll start to see coming pretty soon, we have live interactive video. This has been a feature that's been built for a while. We're going to enable and start to roll that out probably in September for our podcaster pros, meaning that you can go live at any time on Podopolo interactively, either before your episode drops or after your episode drops. This is interactive video. As soon as the live stream finishes, it's automatically posted, but the interaction continues. So we're excited about that. That's coming very, very soon.
This episode's going to be out before September, so I hope you're okay with sharing that.
Well, no, I mean, it's really important that, we do that. So, we're so close, to a lot of these features. And then it's trying to figure out when the best time is to launch them and test them and such. So we'll be working hard on all those things.
Awesome. All things that I'm looking forward to, especially the video and the live stream, and just being able to connect. I think I've got 10 followers now, but I'm working on it. But it's just nice.
Yeah.
It's nice to see that a couple of people are sending me messages to say, I've got an influx of downloads. Maybe somebody's created clips on their behalf and has been
because the listeners could do it. So this is something I suggest for podcasters on Podopolo to do, right? There's a bunch of things to really make that feature work and kind of like really sing for you, is to on your podcast, encourage your listeners to go to Podopolo and create their favorite clips. And you can gamify it by rewarding them for the best ones, or like just getting really creative about it. Because once you get your own audience creating clips and really engaged, your own audience will help you grow your podcast, right? And so there's all kinds of different ways. So that's one of the things that we're working with podcasts, in the next few weeks, to really provide them with the tools and mechanisms to really use that feature, just like use all the other features on Podopolo to really grow their audience. Yeah.
Well, that's rather than it's all being driven by the host, get the listeners to do it.
100%.
If they're coming back every day or every week, that way they feel closer to the actual action. And
like have a contest for, have your folks, vote for your best clip or whatever. And then the person who wins, feature them on your air. I mean, there's all kinds of things like that you can do that are really creative,
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And then that person who's featured on your air is going to create a clip of it, and they're going to share it. And then more people will learn about your podcast, right?
Exactly. They can add voice notes into the episodes. Yeah. Oh, amazing. So before we finish off this episode, because I know we're coming up to definitely the half an hour mark, rapid fire questions. Here we go. Name one other company or CEO except Elon Musk that inspires you. Why do they inspire you?
Okay, so one of them would be Sir Richard Branson, who way back when I was Times media correspondent, I got to spend 15 hours with him in his house in Holland Park in London, just sort of as a fly on the wall. And I noticed a couple of things about him that really stuck with me. He was 100% focused on his unique zone of genius, and he delegated the rest. It's vital. So he's really good at customer service, really good at the vision. And I'd watch him as an evangelist, get people really excited. And then he'd leave the room, and his lawyers and all the operators would come in and do the other stuff, right? That he didn't really much enjoy doing and wasn't necessarily the best at, right? So it's really, getting very focused on that thing. But also the other thing is he's a genius just at customer service and success and making people feel special. And I've always really admired that.
What a good answer. And Richard Branson, amazing guy. I'm not met him, but
just the sense of fun that he infused in all of it. Now, that's not for everybody. I mean, it's just figuring out what are you uniquely good at, like your zone of genius, and doubling down on that and delegating the rest. I think that has really struck with me. I think there are some tremendous entrepreneurs just who really, there's so many people that inspire me, but for whatever reason today that came to mind.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. What's the best piece of business advice you've received?
Oh my goodness.
That's
so many. Okay, here's one that's really interesting. We were talking about values-based pricing and such, before. So I remember it's really easy in your business to fall into, there's working on your business and there's working in your business, right? So when you're working on your business, you're very strategic. You're thinking about the new initiatives. You're thinking about the ways to grow it. When you're working in it, you're fixing a broken link, or you're doing something that anybody else could do. And I remember a business mentor of mine saying, how much would you, Melinda, I see you're fixing your own website. How much would you pay someone to do that? Would it be $20 an hour? Would it be $50 an hour? Whatever. How much would you pay for that? He said, okay, cool. So if you were spending that time instead going and getting a strategic client or closing an investor, and say as a result, you closed a deal for $250,000, or you brought in $1 million of investment in the company, what would be your hourly rate? Would it be still $50? I don't think so. It might be $10,000 an hour, right?
Yeah.
Because of the value you're creating, right? And as a result of that, you're creating so much value because you're able to hire more people. So you're creating jobs, you're helping the economy, you just blah, 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 blah. And that was really stuck with me, because the final thing he said to me was, you see, by working on your website right now, doing that, you're actually stealing from your own company. I was like, ooh, okay, that's heavy. But it was really kind of a sobering advice to really be working on where there's maximum leverage, and being conscious of that, where you're driving, rather than being on a task list where you're just kind of running in place, doing all the other stuff that anybody else could really do. So focus on things that only you can do.
Yeah, so I know this is not part of the rapid fire. So would you say then that would be another mistake that entrepreneurs are making, is they're not focusing on their zone of genius and they're not delegating early enough?
Yes, 100%. Yes, hands down. Because there's something like, I think we all want to be heroes, like I can do it all. And also we get in a rut, because in the very early days, it is just you. So you are doing everything, but it's kind of knowing when to start that delegation process. And like most humans are kind of afraid of change. We can so easily get into a rut. I've always done it this way. I feel comfortable. But to grow a business, you have to be almost continually out of your comfort zone, because you hit a milestone or a place in the business where it's now time for you as the founder and CEO. You got to change. You got to be better at something else. Suddenly you're building a team. Suddenly you're managing a team. Whereas in the beginning, you didn't really have to worry about that. And then maybe you have big legal things you got to worry about, or you have, and so who you're being at any stage of the business is going to change. And so you have to be constantly, conscious on yourself about those sorts of things, and delegating as early as you possibly can, even if it's delegating your laundry. I mean, seriously, right? Because your time is your most valuable thing.
Oh, well, thank you for that follow up on those questions. Last question. I know there's a couple of rapid fire, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. What movie, book, or TV show has changed your life since becoming the CEO of? You've always been the CEO of Podopolo.
I don't think. Let's see, movie, book. I can think of other ones pre-Podopolo that were certainly big influences, like the Surrender Experiment and The Untethered Soul. Those two books were very influential to me on a spiritual level, about meditation, disattaching in a way from outcome, which is really hard, just being more and more of a conscious leader. Those books and many others of that realm, really kind of spiritual, books. But those two in particular. Also, The Big Leap is very interesting. It's all about how a lot of people get stuck in their zone of excellence, and the difference between being there, which is comfortable, and being in your zone of genius. Excellent book. So those influenced me a lot, kind of Podopolo. I'm just thinking of like movies and things like that. I know what I like to binge watch. I enjoyed Succession only because I had the delight of working in the early days for Rupert Murdoch, who owned the Times, and I was the media correspondent. So you can just imagine, someone who's very independent, such as myself, in that circumstance. And being told things like, "Hey, Melinda, this you're writing too much about the internet. It's never going to amount to anything."
Well, here we are.
Or writing something and having him stand right behind me as I was writing. So as a result of that, I was obsessed by HBO's Succession.
Yeah, it's never nice having somebody look over your shoulder while you're trying to concentrate. I get that. Especially
Rupert Murdoch. Anyway,
thank you so much for joining me on SaaS Unlocked today. And it's been a pleasure to talk with you further. So that's it. It's the SaaS Unlocked signing off. That's it. Thank you.